Branding with the big faces.
I love listening to it.
Kane Sims.
Kane Sims, the one and only.
Britain's finest, Mr. Kane Sims.
Dustin Coates.
I like it when you guys are together and talking about voice.
Without further ado, welcome to the show.
There you go. I'll tell you what happens. The video plays on for longer than you might think. And so it doesn't come back to this screen. There we are. We're ready to rumble. Hello.
Hey. All right.
Hello,
Hey,
Dustin.
Kane. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year,
Yeah.
Dan.
I hear we get 15 days to say Happy New Year to everybody we know.
Is that all? I think we can take it longer than that. I think I'll still be saying Happy New Year in February. Happy New Year, Dustin. How was Feliz Navidad, Christmas time, and all that lot?
Yeah, I think it was pretty good. Nothing too noteworthy as most people have experienced. There's not much traveling. There's not much going out, so it's about the same, but pretty good. How about yours?
It was good, nice and chilled, nice and relaxed.
Yeah.
Didn't do much. Built train sets for my son and went for walks, splashing in puddles, which was also fun. I'm actually enjoying the fact that he's 2-year-old because I can just be a kid again. It's quite good. What about you, Dan? Good Christmas
Same deal. I guess we're all in lockdown or modified lockdown. My kids are 30 and 32, so it involves Zoom meetings, not jumping in puddles. But now you've given me an idea.
Yeah, you can't beat the old jumping up and down in muddy puddles to use Peppa Pig's language. But this podcast isn't about Peppa Pig, nor is it about jumping up and down in muddy puddles. It is about conversational AI, and we are glad and honoured to welcome you. Thank you, Ahmed, for the comment on the hat. That's 2 comments I've had on this hat since we've started wearing it. Thank you for that. So thank you, Dan, for joining us. Honoured to have a legend of the speech technology industry join us. How long have you been doing this for?
Too long. I founded Opus back in '85, and part of it was looking at what was going on in automated contact centers at that point, which, oddly enough, and this group might appreciate that, the fun stuff that we studied was when sort of a phone circuit and computers came together. And one of the quick and dirty things people did was sort of modify how directory assistance operators could shorten the amount of time that a directory assistant operator could give the name and address by sort of capturing the query with essentially a robot. And they used the technology they had back then to write scripts, and it saved the phone companies billions of dollars. So, this stuff has been proving its worth in contact centers for decades.
So would you say that recently things have accelerated? I'm reading a lot about the hype and things like that around conversational AI. You said it's been in use for a long time. Like, what is the difference, or is there any difference between what's happening now versus what was happening then?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, everything then. So speech rec has improved in fits and starts in those 30 years. And I don't want to talk about 30 years ago because it really wasn't using speech rec so much as just sort of capturing voice, forwarding it along for somebody to listen to. So let's say that in the past 3 years or so, there's just been amazing acceleration in the accuracy of speech recognition. If you think even 10 years ago, we were getting pretty good at we got past concatenated speech. So you didn't need to say a digit or say a word and stop starting around 2008. Where the advancements have been and where higher powered computers and larger databases of things that can be understood have come along is really I used to say past 18 months, but time flies. So past 2-3 years, it's just been a horse race as you've been able to say pretty much, natural language processing, let's call it that, has supported people speaking in their own words and recognizing intent from those words, and then matching it with the objectives, where that intent takes people. So we've seen incredible acceleration in just what you can do with an automated voice assistant, both at endpoints, intelligent endpoints, but we're here to talk about contact centers. So, it's in the contact centers that, we're seeing efficiencies, and we're seeing what used to be relatively expensive technologies, thanks to new consumption models like blank as a service, becoming affordable for, companies of all sizes to essentially have a virtual assistant answer the phone and sort of understand what somebody wants to do and propel them along their way.
And so then you talked a lot about the growth and the change over the past 30, 35 years. But how would you describe just in a couple of sentences, how would you describe where the industry is today in 2020, or how it was in 2020?
Sure. So industry is a misleading term there. There isn't a single voice industry, if you will, and there isn't a single contact center industry. So, there's, and I used to think that there were kind of two universes when you approach this from the point of view of voice assistants, because there's development going on in sort of a fragmented world where you write Alexa skills or Google Actions, whatever the Bixby, whatever they call themselves now, versus some long-standing investment in contact center technology that's tied to an interactive voice, to speech enabling an interactive voice response system, that automated thing that answers the phone and solicits intent and routes things to the right place. What's going on there is fantastically interesting and something that we'll talk about, I believe, before we finish this conversation. At the same time, the contact center industry itself has seen some explosive growth in cloud-based resources. So as you move to the cloud, what we used to call an IVR may still be called an IVR, but it may be the voice app on a multi-application platform. What we used to call contact center, core technology can be the routing subsystems in a cloud-based service. If you're Amazon and you're running Amazon Web Services and you've designed Amazon Connect as your contact center offering, your raw material is ports and processors and memory, and they're all used in a specialized way, and some of them can be allocated to supporting these automated virtual assistants or bringing conversational AI into the talk paths between companies and their customers or prospects. And that's where we're seeing it, not just growth, but evolution and development of some really interesting applications.
It's interesting. Tell us a bit about Opus Research, and you obviously acquired a wealth of knowledge about all of this kind of stuff, and you cover a heck of a lot of all of the, not just in the contact center, but across the whole range of kind of speech technology areas and stuff like that. So tell us a little bit about what Opus Research does,
sure.
And in particular, what was the kind of main thing or one of the highlight standout things that you covered last year that got you most excited?
Last year, okay. So I'm gonna modify that question a little bit. So to answer the first thing first is what have we been doing lately? So I would say 6 or 7 years ago we coined the term conversational commerce. Right around the turn of the century we were calling them conversational access technologies. But the idea was to look at the technologies that improve conversations between and among people. And forgive me if people have heard me say this over and over again, but people to machine, and then the machine-to-machine conversations that happen to get rid of latencies, to recognize intent more quickly, to propel people along their path to what they want to do. So if you think about what's been going on in the last 6 years and then isolate 2020, what's been fantastically interesting is how it's become quote, democratized, unquote, meaning that within business organizations, you used to think of, oh, the IVR is this thing in the corner of a switch closet with all the phone lines running into it. And it was really the domain of the contact center administration. And maybe if it went south, it was a concern of the customer experience folks or marketing or whomever. In 2020, what we've seen is the realization of, quote, democratization, which means that there are some fantastically interesting tools for building virtual assistants or conversational agents that don't require as much professional services as used, and some specialized skills like, and forgive me because this will sound like I'm advocating sort of a lack of design and that sort of thing, but used to have computational linguists, specialized voice user interface designers and that sort of thing involved in every project that you had. And what we're finding now, and this is really accelerating adoption, are toolkits for, well, toolkits is not the right word, but a set of tools or service creation environments where the subject matter expert or the project leader can be, from the department. It can be your best customer service agent, or if it's a specialized area, an advisor that sort of understands what's important, says, oh yeah, we bought sort of a package, if you will, or a platform or a set of services from a solution provider. And I know how to, I recognize that they've pre-packaged them with certain dialogue modules and conversations already. And for me, it's just making sure that it's relevant to what I'm hearing and I know best. I'm not technical. I know how to, piece these together and monitor and make sure my virtual agent is doing what I would have done.
Interesting. That's a good observation. It's interesting how, there's lots of tools kind of coming out now, or been around for quite a while, and a lot of the providers themselves are starting to acquire that kind of toolkits as well, aren't they? Like Five9 acquiring Inference, and Vonage have got kind of stuff up and running and stuff with conversation design tooling and things like that. What do you think the impact of having kind of no code, low code tooling? You mentioned one means that the people who have the actual conversations with the customers can get things up and running quickly. They can tune them more towards like how they would handle that conversation and stuff. But at the same time, there are certain practices that a conversation designer or a VUI designer will understand around conversation analysis and how to structure conversation and how to make sure that people get through that successfully, how to anticipate follow-up questions, how to program the NLU, to train the NLU, and all of those kind of things. So where do you see those kind of skill sets sitting alongside those kind of no code kind of tools? Do you think that going forward, companies creating IVR agents will require those kind of skills, or do you think that these tools are going to get to a point where a lot of that stuff's already handled for you?
Wow. That is a tremendous question. And what I hark back to is, in my mind, is, back in the early days of web storefronts, people were told, oh, you're a small business person. You can just load your inventory and blah, blah, blah. And you ended up with some pretty ugly, design storefronts out there. And I'm not advocating, building virtual assistants that, in the interest of making them administrable by, departmental executives. You're ignoring some of the just hard-learned lessons of the voice user interface designers, and the technical folks that make sure this stuff works. So I think that what we're going to learn, initially, as companies become acquainted with the tools, bring the team together to design, identify what the use cases they want to do initially, bring the subject matter experts in to do that, that you do indeed have to have at least one or two folks that understand, what it takes to build a quality conversational user interface, some of the basic hard-learned rules of building an effective voice user interface, and actually a vision of the future that recognizes what can be done. Because let's be honest, there's solution providers that say, hey, I can get you up with a voice bot in a day, and just feed me your FAQ, and I can ingest that. I know what's most frequently asked, and that so I can just answer those things. And you have kind of a crappy static thing that isn't helping anybody and creates a bad user experience. So you could say that older but wiser solution providers know, and actually let's go to the implementers, know that it's an invitation for disaster to have zero in terms of technical knowledge and experience in voice user interface design involved. And what we're talking about now is balancing, at the highest level, what human input is to where elements of artificial intelligence can help, and building some of those initial use cases. But whether you call it supervised learning or managed evolution of these things, you do want experts in with some sense of style, with some just as you do need designers for attractive storefronts in a visual world, you do need designers and technicians in the voice world to make sure you've made an attractive, usable, and reusable virtual agent.
Especially given that a lot of people, they'll use them when they phone up and get connected to one, but they wouldn't necessarily want to call up and speak to a bot kind of thing. So I always think that whenever you're designing a voice user interface, you've kind of got to make sure that the experience is as frictionless and as simple as possible, because it's a little bit like designing a government website. Nobody goes to a government website because they want to go there and they're dying to have an experience. They go there because they have to renew a passport, they have to tax a car, they have to do something. They've got no choice about it. And it's the same kind of philosophy where when you call a company, if it happens to have a bot on the line, I mean, there's a lot of research out there now which is saying things like, customers are happy to have their interactions facilitated by a bot. But if you asked them whether they would prefer it, I would wager that more people are likely to prefer an actual conversation rather than a bot interaction. But when they speak to it, they're inevitably just they'll end up going through with it. So being able to design something knowing that someone might not necessarily want to have that conversation means that there's even more pressure, I suppose, on designing something that's natural, that's easy to use, that understands the user, whatever they say, and that allows them to get whatever they need to get done. Would you agree?
Well, it's interesting you use the government application as an example, because we had an early use case that was described to me that just had to do with somebody wanting to go on a fishing trip, and knowing they needed a fishing license was just part of it. But if you had a well-designed voice bot, let's call it that. If it emulated sort of the person that was, at the counter where you were going to get it, would also point out that, well, if you're getting a fishing license, you also need a park permit, what days you're going to be there. In order to complete the task to do what you want to do, you don't want a designer that says, okay, this person came in, wanted a fishing license, I gave him a fishing license, and I'm done, success, perfect, out of there. And that's what some bots do. Whereas if you had a user interface designer, with a broader view and a subject matter expert that said, hey, if they're going to ask for that, they're going to want these 4 other things. And I can design a user interface that, you can use all the technical, I have these slots to fill and it's going to involve these turns. And so you want that prior knowledge to make sure that the voice user interface, the intelligent bot, if you will, is actually working on behalf of that person, because you can create a really bad experience that for somebody where you do fulfill what they ask for precisely, and you're not really understanding what their intent was and what they need to complete their task. And that's where professionals come in, and there's a lot more behind that as well.
Interesting. Would you say then that so the start of that conversation was around accessible tooling, allowing almost anybody to create and deploy, then moving into actually we do need some specialist skills to kind of to do this. I'd be interested in getting your thoughts in. Well, I'd like to know Dustin's thoughts on them tools in terms of like what might be the limitations or benefits of those kind of tools as well. And then secondly to you, Dan, on the challenges around what contact center kind of managers are facing and whether that skills gap is one of them. But Dustin, before we wrap up on the tooling, what's your kind of opinions on those drag and drop low code accessible kind of toolkits versus the kind of more do it yourself sort of approach?
I mean, I personally think they're great, right? Dan, I think you bring up a really good point in that there's still a major room for expertise here. It's not going to be a Squarespace, right? It's not going to be a Squarespace for IVR. It's really going to require, at least at this point, some expertise and probably some tech there as well. But being able to empower people to build things that they weren't able to build before. Dan, you started off this conversation really great talking about when you got into this industry, and we think about the amount of effort that it took 30 plus years ago to do things that you can do in seconds today, right? It's quite incredible. And so, Dan, I really would love to hear more of your thoughts on this as well, and to Kane's question as well.
You were so articulate. I was thinking about what you were doing. Kane, remind me what the original question was.
my question was around the on the one hand, we've got easy to use tooling. Okay,
yeah.
A lot of providers out there, Cognigy, Speakeasy, Boost. There's a lot of providers out there that even Google Dialogflow CX. A lot of providers are creating tools that make it a lot easier to design and deploy these agents. At the same time, we've spoke there around if you have some real expertise in-house, then you're more likely to design something that is a better user experience, more likely to allow people to get their job done, more likely to figure out what those follow-on use cases are and what those kind of like related conversations are that you might need to have around it. So it seems as though on the one hand, we've got easy to use tools, easy accessible tools. However, we still got the requirement for specialized skill sets. And so that seemingly it sounds to me like that's one of the challenges that contact centers and organizations looking to use conversational AI to enhance their digital transformation efforts. That might be one of the challenges that they face. Might be they might have the tools but not the skill sets. So whether you want to elaborate on that, or whether you've got any other observations of additional challenges that you've noticed on that front.
Yeah, because as we were prepping for this and you sent some questions around, let's add one more dimension to that, which is, voice is just one of many channels. And just as the call center has evolved from a voice channel only thing to a contact center, which is, managing interactions, you get agents in seats looking at a workspace. Some of it doesn't involve voice. They're monitoring social networks. They're looking at incoming texts and things from chatbots that are text. That one of the requirements becomes providing consistent, correct answers to the individuals that are calling, regardless of how they came in. So as you design the voice user interface, some of the back-end stuff that it's hooking up to, through APIs and connectors and all that sort of thing, is to some sort of what we call conversational intelligence, which can range from knowledge bases to, sort of data stores with documents. There's different tools that a solution provider can bring to bear to make sure that you're getting accurate information, even if it's from some dynamic process. So if it's booking travel, knowing seat availability, all this stuff, has to get brought in on brought into the conversation in real time, or something that feels like real time. I've cited real time as like the worst term ever. that what we're really talking about is either in conversation, or in context, or something like that. But okay, that was my digression. But I think you know where I'm going here. Is that the drag and drop tools, I think, are a blessing. I'm gonna go with Dustin on that. And they don't have to be an invitation to be just like Squarespace or Yahoo storefronts in the olden days, because the things that you're pulling down lately are somehow very rich with more dynamic elements than the old sort of Visio, like here's the input, here's the potential output, blah blah blah. The tools are the old tools, it struck me, were just looking strictly at the voice user interface, almost in a vacuum. In other words, if you brought me in, I could ingest past conversations, and I could pay attention to the humans about, hey, which ones were successful and which weren't. And I could, build as successful a set of conversations as I can, just based on history. When you take sort of a broader approach, you're saying, oh, in this tool, I have not just the successful conversations between me and my customers, I can benefit from what's known, let's say you're taking old IVR scripts, or you're taking, recorded, you're taking information about, with deeper characteristics of that conversation, and you can build with those drag and drop interfaces some fairly complex back and forths between companies and their customers, and also add the dimension of, they may have started the conversation on a with a chatbot, and then been asked to transfer over to a live agent. And then it gets transferred to a voice bot, or there's a bunch of things that we're able to do with a relatively simple interface, but there's a lot of complexity underlying that I think we're dealing with better in a graphic environment.
And a lot of these tools have. Go on, Dustin.
Go. I know. I was just going to say, you were talking about some of the richness of what we're returning, or some of the richness of what we're providing back to the users. And I want to hear a little bit more about that. But Kane, you were about to speak to something just now.
I was just going to say that just to add on to what Dan was saying, that these tools, the drag and drop tools, the vast majority of them have fairly decent integration potential. It's not like you just create back and forth dialogues. You can actually do some pretty decent integrations in there as well. But yeah, go on, Dustin. Repeat that question for Dan, was it?
Yeah, it was just Dan, you were alluding to these conversations are getting richer. We're pulling in more rich information. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that rich information is that you're seeing, and how these conversations are getting maybe more advanced, or bringing in more information, or more complex, or what have you.
Yeah. So they do tend to be use case driven. They vary by industry. I'm trying to how to encapsulate this. As companies start thinking of their customer experience, trying to foster ongoing conversations with customers. In other words, I always used to hear the term customer journey, and it would describe sort of the processes that you or I as customers go through as we try to make a selection. And people use buying a car as an example. So considered purchase starts with a web search, usually with Google. Then it moves to maybe a social network where you say, hey, I'm thinking of buying a Lexus, whatever, and what do you think of that? That event then lands on a company's website. That, of course, will refer you to a dealership. And what the pandemic has taught us now that we're homebound, in many of these instances where we may have gone out to a dealership or gone to a retailer, we're going to carry this out on a digital channel. And as we gain confidence with using our voice as opposed to typing broken English or whatever language you speak into search bars, those can be voice conversations with a voice agent. And when you think of the richness, it used to be that the voice agents may have been programmed to answer easy questions or navigate you to the resource that knows. So it was the sessions that you spent with the voice agent were kind of short. You get your question answered, you hang up. It understands what you want to do and send you somewhere else, or it knows what's in a website or some navigable stuff. So search kind of becomes navigation. It gets you where you're going. As things get richer and you realize that, hey, I succeeded talking to a voice agent and got some simple stuff, I'm going to try X. I'm going to say, hey, is there a blue 2021 blah 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 in stock somewhere, and can you order it for me? Which means that it does have to go out and find live inventory and return it. If it's even richer and it moves you towards, the sort of the negotiation stage where it says, here's a retail price, and you say, I don't want that. And it says, I'll have to talk to my manager. It starts really emulating how, people would be doing this. And then, of course, there's the upsell. So if you sort of think of the things that used to get carried out person to person, as virtual assistants get more human-like, and our ability to sort of leave the house and talk to people becomes limited, you're just going to see more of these interactions happening between an automated voice assistant and people. And that said, it's self-perpetuating. They'll get richer as people discover that they can do more stuff. Because I feel at this point in time, the constraint is people have sort of low expectations of what a voice assistant can do, and it can already do a lot more than we're expecting. And the answers are getting built into, or the ability to answer complex questions and follow-up questions and take actions on behalf of the brand are, far beyond what people are using right now.
That's probably the problem, though, isn't it? Is that the potential and the capability is there, whereas people have been trained over the last 20, 30 years in how terrible RVR experiences are.
Yeah.
And how people, even the very simplistic ones that have been around for years, like sometimes don't recognize your accent or what have you, and then it's press 1 for this and press 2 for that. And then at the same time, when you talk about voice assistants, Alexa, Google Assistant, so there's a lot of rubbish out there. And so I wonder whether part of that is that people have been trained through a series of poor experiences over the last few years, decades even in some cases. And at the same time, it's like the potential is there, but in that use case you explained there around wanting to know whether or not you've got a car in our local dealership, and then a follow-up is, do you want to book a test drive, and then the price is this, and the upsell, do you want a mats included, and I'll only buy it if I have petrol. You're then getting into some very complex dialogue. Yeah. That does take a lot of work and time and effort to craft and to test and to perfect and to mold and to iterate over time. And so there's not actually that many of those kind of use cases around, certainly on the voice side of things. Maybe there is, because I just haven't experienced them. So I wonder if that's the two combinations there, is that one, people have been trained through a series of poor experiences over the years, and that those richer experiences, although there's potential and the opportunity is sitting there, really, there just isn't that many in production. Would you concur with that or not?
I'm going to say I don't know right now. As I talk to companies that have ingrained their solutions with the next generation of what we used to say, oh wow, they're using deep neural networks, and there's cognition going on. Opus, I should say, is still trying to get our arms around how much of what you're describing as, hey, we'd have to have hard code and look at all these things and do some heavy programming versus, saying these things into a black box that, let's say an IBM Watson has come in and ingested, a lot of conversations, a lot of outcomes, and this, that, and the other. And, there's less programming to do, more that moves up into sort of higher level programming where you sort of describe the problem and the outcome. And there's stuff that goes on in between that is no longer, hard-coded branch, some sort of saved dialogue model or something like that. It is actually conversation.
Sounds like Alexa conversations, Dustin, doesn't it?
Yeah. It sounds like pulling in a lot of this new AI and what we were saying there. Dan, how much of that actually do you see going on? How much is AI and you talked about this a little bit in the beginning, the expansion and the increasingly rapid strengthening of AI, how big of an impact is that having on your work?
Oh, so it's really, really huge, and also it's exposing some problems. Well, every advancement exposes problems we didn't know we had before. And now I think that the combination of natural language understanding, machine learning, cognition happening in sort of this mysterious layer of a neural network, the results are really impressive. But then the next step is, and Opus is going to be writing about this in the coming year, is explainability, so that we humans can rely on and are relying in some pretty interesting use cases, using some form of artificial intelligence to make decisions on behalf of like a service provider. So one of the examples that actually was IBM used with us lately is, if I'm applying for a loan and a conversational virtual agent can walk me through filling out the form, or we can do it in voice and I can just answer a bunch of questions, get that submitted, and it goes into a loan advisor bot, if you will, but something that's built on artificial intelligence. And it returns, either way, it returns an approval or a disapproval. Either way, you want to know why. And it turns out that the technologies can do all this stuff, but in the interest of conforming with compliance or just being, a trustable service provider, you want to support explainability. But and I would think. The past 2 years, we've had the ability to build pretty robust dialogues capable of doing a lot of things on behalf of the end users, but we've held back because it's not explainable. If you have decision trees that you could document, people sort of understand that. So we as humans sort of constrain the use of technology because we like to understand what it's doing. And so that's sort of a next avenue to tackle. It's orthogonal to what this call was about, but the technologies have been there, and I think it's manifest in easier to use design tools, and then these sort of decision tree based models are being replaced with, just send it over there, let that bot figure it out, what the next steps are, and then returns the prompts or whatever to move the people along. Prompts, answers, navigational instructions, all that.
It just needs training, doesn't it? Like Alexa Conversations, that what you described is pretty much sounds like what Alexa Conversations does, whereby you give it some examples of some of the dialogue that you're expecting to happen in the conversation and a resolution which you expect the outcome to be, and maybe there's an intent that triggers it, and the whole dialogue is essentially managed by Alexa. And so if there's weaving in and out, or there's like clarifications, or there's like to and fro in, you don't design that whole thing. You just give it some examples and ideas of what you think it might do, and then essentially it takes on the design of the conversation. But the thing with that is that that's only available for a small number. In fact, is it a small number of intense conversations is available for right now, or is it available broadly for everything? Dustin, do you know?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, the goal is really just to have that general conversation and move away from the intent model, I believe. So I think it's just a slightly different way of thinking about things in general.
That's interesting. So that seemingly, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but thinking about the future, that seemingly might be one of the things that we see a little bit more, is that dialogue being managed a little bit more kind of centrally, and maybe some of that decision tree stuff is being devolved to the AI once it's trained in a certain intent or a certain domain, if you like. What are some of the other things that you might kind of not even forecast, but what are some of the things that you anticipate would happen in 2021 as far as kind of conversational AI technology, speech technology rather, and the contact center? Where do you see things heading in the next 12 months?
Well, my big word is ubiquity. I think one of the things we learned in lockdown is the voice channel has been really, really robust, and it's not going away. And as I mentioned before, the idea will be to support that, of course, but support by recognizing that some of the voice is spoken to an Alexa skill. So I'd like to see some of the kinks in sort of this balkanization that we see right now, where it's developed differently for a contact center base or enterprise voice assistant is independent of whether there's something for a smart speaker, independent of something for mobile. Because as you think of large firms, they're already trying to figure out how to bring together a lot of initiatives that may have started with different staff, different intent. The mobile app developer was different from the old guard IVR developer, and so we're going to see sort of a coming together in terms of voice experience across any point of ingress, any device being used. And that may not be in 2021, but we got a lot, with some large companies, it's been launched already. And in 2021, we'll see a lot of effort going into that area. I think the other thing, and we chat a little bit about this in our past conversations, is and you kind of mentioned here. So if Amazon, Google, Microsoft, IBM, are going to always have resources that are larger than some of the smaller companies to do the sorts of things that happen in that conversational AI black box, they're going to be the providers, through APIs or connectors of some sort, of better understanding, better recognition, some models for vertical applications, which means that those toolkits we're talking about at the enterprise or contact center level are now open. So the resources to build the VA may be something that, if you're, in a Avaya shop or a Cisco or Five9 or whomever, you're going to want to support your customers. So you, the contact center provider, thinking about your customer, the enterprise, you're going to find people there that say, oh, I want to use Lex, or I want to use, Dialogflow. And you're just sort of open as saying, okay, you can use any or all of those that you want to, that seem to be best suited for your use case. and that's been so ubiquity, openness. Probably have 5 others, but we can sort of stop there with the passes the smell test.
Do you reckon that'll happen though? Like, so, you've got Google, you've got Amazon, you've got Microsoft, you've got IBM, you've got a lot of like, I wouldn't say standardization, but availability of the technology at an ecosystem level. Yeah, BBC built their entire assistant on Microsoft Azure AI, the whole thing, right? So you've got those capabilities out there that will allow you to build an entire assistant if you want to, or just pluck out bits that you need. You might be using Microsoft speech recognition. You might use Lex NLU or whatever. You might use Twilio's NLU and Dialogflow to serve responses. Or there's the whole range of different things. Read speaker, text to speech voices. If you break it all down, there's a whole range of different elements that you can strip and plug in from different providers. And the best way that I've seen it kind of demonstrated is. Have you seen Audio Code's voice AI gateway?
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah.
So and it just allows you to plug in any NLU, any speech recognition, any text to speech provider, and that inevitably seems the way to go. And when you think about organizations and enterprises who are looking at creating virtual assistants, you're not just creating it for IVR or for your chatbot on your website. You need to create it in a way that allows you to extend it and put it into any channel or any interface that you require it. But when it comes to those providers, Genesis, Avaya, etc. I've had a lot of experience in government, and the government providers, Mitel, companies like that, Capita, tend to be a lot more kind of product oriented historically and culturally, whereby the interest is often in keeping you in the product and keeping you using other bits of the product. Now, I know that there is openness when it comes to Google Dialogflow that's integrated into most of the contact center systems, but at the same time, you see a lot of the contact center providers bringing in their own tools like Five9 with inference and Vonage, as I mentioned, acquiring over AI. And so on the one hand, there is potential for openness, which I think will be better for everybody because that will allow you to truly build an assistant for your entire organization that you put into any other channel. But there's a little thing in the back of my mind that wonders whether a company like Five9, with the reach they have, with the relationships that they have with their customers, whether there will be slightly less open than you might think, given that they're all trying to find their own tools.
It's a great question. It makes me think of where this all began, but when with unified communications in general, where if you sort of looked and said, oh, they want to unify everything, but they want to unify it under their own brand, that's one end of a continuum. On the other end, and actually, if you scratch the surface of Five9, even though they acquired inference was sort of open to using, whichever NLU, so they had the tools for building the dialogue models and branding them and that sort of thing. But they were fairly open to, which ASR you'd want to use and TTS. So I think we're seeing more openness than you might imagine. It's good news for a company like Nuance. So if there are companies that have a reputation for building accurate ASR, human-like TTS, and it's different from the person you want to use for or person or company. I keep thinking corporations or people, and it's different from, or may vary from use case to use case, who has the best, the path to the cash register or way to check inventory and that sort of thing that you are indeed going to find. And I'm just sort of calling it sort of a conversational AI layer that sits between some of these branded platform offerings. In one of my recent posts, I call it, we used to be either or both and. I think we're in the era of either and. that you can have the best of both worlds right now, and the tooling is open enough that you can bring in sort of the best of breed, and when you used to say a platform and you chose a vendor in the past, you were thinking, oh, I'm choosing, Avaya or whomever, and it was a single brand. Now they're telling us, well, I mean, look at, Cisco, for instance, and Genesis, and all the premises-based leaders that are moving to the cloud. Many of them have forged a relationship with Google for Google's, contact center AI. But I don't think it's at the exclusion of other families of AI that may be better for particular purposes, or at least that's what I am seeing happening right now. And in terms of those toolings that we talked about at the highest level, there's sort of an abstraction layer that lets you sort of build the dialogues that make the most sense. And then there's something that looks like a marketplace of APIs behind it that let you select the element of AI that suits best that particular application. So I do think that's going on, and maybe the contact center is showing the way there as sort of a nexus or hub for accomplishing that to to a particular end.
It's interesting that, because it sounds as though everything here could quite easily just kind of converge. Like, Dustin, we've had lots of conversations in the past, haven't we, about smart displays, tablets, phones, TVs, monitors, and even laptops. Once you get a voice interface that works well across them all, everything's the same, because you can do everything on your phone more or less that you can do on your tablet and on your laptop. And once you get, Apple TV, or not necessarily Apple TV, but do you know what I'm saying? Like, accessing your voice interface through any device becomes, then device doesn't really matter, and so all of the devices start to kind of homogenize and converge almost. They've all got screens. You can tap them all, you can swipe them all, you can talk to them all, you can all get very similar things done on them all. I'm wondering whether the same kind of thing happens with this kind of AI technology, where you got Microsoft, who can do speech recognition, NLU, and text to speech. You've got Google, who can do the same, Amazon can do the same, IBM can do the same, and so that layer you talked about, is that the differentiator for some of these companies, because it's just in voice flow essentially is that without the ability to hook into those APIs, isn't it? So I'm just wondering whether there's any whether there will be any differentiation in 5 years' time with all this tooling, or whether it all just homogenizes and it'll be all much of a muchness. What do you reckon?
Me or Dustin?
That's a you down.
And then I want to hear Dustin's opinion. I mean, to me, there's no question that's where it's moving, and there are differentiators, because it'll be sort of the quality of the tools, and you bring in the magic word of orchestration, and orchestration is how well you coordinate these disparate things working together, and also the skills, and maybe it starts out as professional services, because the one thing we learned in the past 4 or 5 years with enterprise voice assistants is, in the early years, every single one required a lot of professional services and tools that only the professional services people could use. As time went by, there were libraries of things that people did most frequently, and you were minimizing the expense. Everything wasn't a one for. You could get up and running, and you'd have less to do, and that involved them, and there'd be tools for the individuals there. So that won't go away. You're asking a slightly different question in terms of it applying across the board, whether you're using a voice remote or talking to an ATM or something like that. And I would point out with that, and it's not even trying to answer the question you're asking, but if you sort of start thinking 5 or 10 years out, the importance of voice and the fact that each of us has unique qualities to our voice and how we talk and that sort of thing means that you do want that free-floating voice recognizer out there. And I know it sounds like I'm talking about surveillance society, and we all know how we feel about that. But your voice's unique identifier means that if there is kind of a ubiquitous voice assistant capability on just about everything, your car, your TV, your appliances, that you, the person talking, become the unifying force, and you're asserting your identity and perhaps dragging your preferences along, as you just go around the physical world, and you just sort of expect, just like Star Trek, you expect there to be a microphone on most things, and you can invoke things, and it'll know that you are you, and carry out things on your behalf. I mean, that's the dream.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's been like the I suppose it's the path that it's on, but it's been like what I thought Alexa could be, and maybe still could, is that kind of like the thing that you can just ask whatever it is to and get anything done. So, for example, in that instance there where, your voice assistant is on every device, you can access it from anywhere. It authenticates you based on the sound of your voice. So in theory, you'll be able to say, Alexa, talk to my mortgage company. Hi, it's your mortgage company. What do you need? Oh, I need a mortgage holiday because I've been furloughed because of COVID. Okay, so when whatever the questions are, apply for it, get it done and dusted, and then it's done. Basically, it's taking the voice bot that people would be creating for the IVR system, but then putting it through other channels, which is that philosophy of having one assistant that you can put anywhere.
Exactly.
And that's kind of that's the ideal. But I don't know. It seems like that's been the idea for at least in my mind for the last kind of 4 years. But
right. Well, we're that much closer. And I have to end on that note because I have to jump to my 1:30 here. But this went really fast. This is great.
It's been great. It's been fantastic. Thank you for joining us. Where can people find out more about you and find out more about Opus Research?
Oh, absolutely. Come visit opusresearch.net. That's our website, and you'll see all the areas that we cover, and occasional posts by me and the rest of the staff. And I'm also at DNM54 on Twitter, and that's where I try to point out things that look really interesting and retweet stuff from you guys and other people making this all happen.
Wicked. DNM. I've got that right? DNM.
Correct. Yeah.
Wicked. Fantastic. Well, Dan, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
And that was brilliant. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next week.
Very good. Thanks.